Ben Amitzorim is also connected with Teirot, Tfilos, Tzedakah, so everybody should give Tzedakah. We have the honor today to have a Choshev German, Rav Avi Ashkenazi, which is going to give us some insight into the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Rav Ashkenazi, bevakasha.
Okay, Bechal is a known word that when an artist tells you something, you have to believe him because he just learned that day. But when a Papa tells you something, it's not lav dafka that he's telling you something that you learned that day. Maybe he's telling you something that you learned decades ago. So you might not be so meduyah. So this is something that I just happened to search about today. And the concern also is I didn't get enough time to be mine and all the pratim, but at least I'm going to try to give the general ideas and the general concepts. So there's the Mishnah in Sefes Midas, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Gimel, tells us about the Kevish and the Mizbeach, about the ramp of the Mizbeach. We know that Torah tells us that you can't go in the Mizbeach using steps, so we have to build a ramp. And then the Mishnah tells us that the dimension, it says that it's Kevish of the Mizbeach. The Kevish was on the south side of the Mizbeach, as you enter the Beit HaMikdash on the left side. It was 32 ames long by 16 ames wide. The Mizbeach itself was 32 by 32 was a square, so the Kevish was like something similar. It was 16, which is half of the side of the Mizbeach, and 32 the same exact measurement of the Mizbeach itself. And then in the Perek Hey Mishnah Beis, the Mishnah is telling us about the measurements of the whole Azara, the Eidah of the Azara from the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash from the time after the Ezra's nothing from up until the south side, and also the Reif of the Azara from the Mizrach side to the Minor. And then the Mishnah goes on to explain us the Eidah and the Reichev, and then the Mishnah gives us the Pratim, and it says it was 135 ames. Not self-in the Dani, meaning on the sides of the Beis HaMikdash as you enter the Beis HaMikdash. And then it says that Kevish on Mizbeach 62. The Mizbeach together with the Kevish were 62 ames together. So there's the question, how could it be if we just said that the Mizbeach was 32 and the Kevish was 32, it should have been 64. So that's the question that the Gemara brings in Zvachim, Daf Samat Beis on the base. So the Gemara explains the Nimtza Berech Amal Al Yisoid Ve'amal Al Sevev, that actually when the Kevish we say that it was 32 ames, it's covering part of the Mizbeach. It's covering an amma of the Yisoid. As we know, the Mizbeach was not a cube, it was going up and down, and the Rambam explains also that you go up a little bit and then go in, and up a little bit and in. So the Kevish covered one amma of the Yisoid and one amma of the Yisoid. So there you have two ammas that are covering each other. The Kevish is covering the Mizbeach. So there you have it, that it's not 64, it's 62, because the Kevish is kind of on the Mizbeach. So that's why we come to the discussion that even though the Kevish was 32 ames long, when it comes to putting them together, it was only 62 ames and not 64. And the same we find in Rambam also in the Prakim of the Yuchad is the Chira Perek Beis, and also in Perek Hey. Now, just a few points. When the Gemara says Yisoid, it doesn't mean there was a Yisoid, because there was no Yisoid on the Tzad Ma'ir. When you know the Yisoid didn't go around the whole Mizbeach, so the Pashtim explained that it was the only connected the Yisoid, where the other the Yisoid would be. And also when the Gemara says Amma, it wasn't 6 tefachim, as you know the Rambam also points out, it's brought down also the Gemara that it was 5 tefachim. That most of the Ammas in the Beis HaMikdash we go by 6 tefachim, the regular Amma Beinanis, but when it comes to the Mizbeach, the Yisoid and the Sevev, there were 5 tefachim only each. So that also we have to keep in mind. So the Rambam also brings these halachas in Mishnah Torah, and he tells us also that he brings a little different. He writes that the Kevish was Shloshim V'Shtayim, also 32 ames long. And he already tells us that he was eating, kind of taking the space of only 30 ames on the floor. But it will also cover the am of the Yisoid and the am of the Sevev, like he explained. And then later on, Hallachot as well, also when he calculates the length and the width of the Azara, he also tells us that the Kevish was only 30 ames. The Gemara only says 62. The Rambam even specifies and tells us that the Kevish was 30 ames long. Now there are two general ways of viewing practically how this was. How was the Kevish next to the Mizbeach? There's the Pashat Kipshat of the Gemara that the Mizbeach was the Kevish was 32 ames long, but only 30 ames was on the floor right before the Yisod, and then you have 2 ames covering the Yisod and the Seviv that reach on the curve, on the surface of the gavish, that when the Kohanim would go up to the Mizbeach, they would walk actually 32 ames. So, that they would walk and then plus 2 ames on the floor, that these are the 2 ames that we're covering, 1 am of the Yisod and 1 am of the Seviv. That's the Pashut of the Gemara. The Gemara says that that it's covering 1 am of the Yisod and 1 am of the Seviv. And there you have it on the floor itself. You would have 32 ames, 30 ames of the kevish itself, 2 ames of that, the first 2 ames of the Mizbeach, and then 30 more ames of the rest of the Mizbeach, and then you have a total of 62. That's the Pshat of learning the Gemara. But then there's another way, which is the Rama brings in Pirsha Mishnayos, in Maseches Midrash, that he says that no, that 32 ames means the length of actually the surface of the ramp. You go up the kevish, the hypotenuse of the triangle, that's the 32 ames. That's what the Gemara means when it says that the Oirech of the kevish was 32 ames. And when the Gemara tells us later, the Mishnah tells us later that it's 62, it happens to be that the base, together with the Mizbeach, the kevish was like 30 ames. So that's the other way of learning the metzius of the kevish. Now, one of the questions that comes up is not only in terms of when you measure the length and the width of the azara. So there's another important part that it says in the Gemara also that Shimon ben Yochai says that there was a space between the kavish and the mizbeach. As we know that for dam it has to be zrik on the Gemara learns from dam that you also bite the kabbanis every time they had to put something in the mizbeach, they had to toss, they had to throw. So therefore you also need a space between the kavish and the mizbeach. So the question comes up when both the Gemara, the Mishnah and Rambam tell us the dimensions of the azara from one side to the other side. They say that the whole mizbeach with the kavish were 62 ames. So the question is, what about that avir? What about that space that we speak about in the Gemara that there was between the mizbeach and the kevish? What about that space? It doesn't mention anything in the Mishnah, or the Rambam doesn't mention anything about it. So there are different ways of explaining that. And by the way, the Tosfos says that this space is not something small. This is the Gemara says that has to be aviv gadol v'nikrat, something that's recognized, something big, something more than the dam, more than the whole biur, on how the space over here is more than the next halach in Rambam that he says it was only like the Kimloi chut, and then that's what this says. Even though Rashi in Chumash says differently, there's different pirushim if in the Mishkan was different or the Beis Hamikdash. But bottom line is that we see that from Tosfos it was a big space. So what about that space? Where did it go when you calculate the width between the tzalfin side of the Zara and the Doran side of the Zara? What happened to that avir that was between the kevish and mizbeach? So like I said, there are different ways of explaining this. I'll give 3 general ones. Number one is that you can see that the kevish was a ramp that went up all the way to the mizbeach, and then right before he went a little down, and then he went straight down to where it was the base. So that space that you have, you can say that it was 32 ames here, or according to the Pirush Mishnah Rambam, 32 on the ramp, and then you still have the space right before the mizbeach. There's a way of calculating that and including that in the attachment that it's 62 total here with the kevish and the mizbeach, and nevertheless you still have 32 ames of the kevish itself. That's one way of explaining it. The other way of explaining is that, as we mentioned before, that the am of the Yisod and the am of the Seviv were only 5 tefachim each. So you have the Yisod on both sides, on the tzalfin of the mizbeach, on the tzalfin and on the dorim. So you end up gaining 4 tefachim because you have the Yisod is 5, Seviv is 5, and on the other side you also have 5 and 5. So you end up gaining 4 tefachim that we didn't account for. So you can say that the space was the length of 4 tefachim, but still not enough because many bring that the space was big enough, more than an amma, but still it's an afshar mehma that it was these 4 tefachim. That's another possible explanation. And another one is that when we speak about the amas of the kevish, someone to find it that the kevish also is one of the things that the Mishnah the Gemara mentions that the amas were not complete also. Not only the Yisod, not only the Seviv, but also the amas of the kevish. Whenever we're talking about the kevish, there was 32 amas, it means there was 32 amas of the 5 tefachim. But then when the Gemara tells us the length of the azara to the tzalfin, that means regular amas. So there you have it. You have 32 amas. Each amma is missing a tefach when you say 32. But when you count from one side to the other, we're talking about regular amas dimensions, and then you can also have a space between the kevish and mizbeach that you can account for. Just want to mention, there's a famous story from the Rebbe. I think it was Chavav Adar Ish in Toshim Beis, that the Dov Levanoni Alav Shalom, he came to the Rebbe and he showed the model of the Mizbeach to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe, by dollars, it was the last time that we had dollars right before Chav Zayin Adar, and then the Rebbe asked him, where's the kevish? So he says, the kevish, he pointed to the Rebbe where it was, so the Rebbe said it was too small. So he told the Rebbe, oh, I measured. So the Rebbe said, okay, if you measure, you measure. And then when he came home, he measured it again, and then he saw that it was actually missing a few millimeters. He says it was missing 3 millimeters because instead of doing 32 ames on the base, instead of he said that the kevish is 30 ames. You say it's 30 ames, so instead of doing 30 ames in the base, you would get 32 ames in the top, like we were saying according to the Rambam Mishnayos. He calculated 30 ames on the ramp itself. When you do that, you lose a lot of space. So that's what he did at the beginning, that he built a model based on the dimension that the ramp itself was 30 ames. When you do that, you're losing a lot. You don't get 32 never, because the ramp is along the side. So that was the mistake that he did. Now, he also says in the video that the scale that he used was 1 to 200. So it's interesting that he based on the model of the Beis Hamikdash, he based it on the Rambam. And Hilchot is a Bechira, all the dimensions, all the midas he gets from the Rambam. But I did the cheshbon, and when he comes to the kevish of the Mizbeach, he says it was off by 3 millimeters. And if he's using the scale of 1 by 200, it comes out that he was using the kevish. They were explaining according to the Pasha the Gipshat in the Gemara that the 32 ames means the base on the floor, including those 2 ames, the am of the Yisrael and the am of the Soivev, and not the way that the Rambam explains in Kiddush HaMishnah, is that the 32 ames is on the ramp. So that's an interesting order. Now, in terms of the angle, as a bacher, I always heard the question: what was the slant of the mizbeach? How hard it was to walk on that ramp? So the Gemara at the end of the Gemara in Zvachim, Daf Sabagim of Dalet, brings that in all of the washim of the mizbeach, apparently there were other ramps of the mizbeach. It says that all the ramps were in a way that it was every 3 amas that you walk, there was one amma of elevation. So for every 3 amas you go up 1 amma. So but the Gemara says, but that was for almost all the vashim in the Beis Hamikdash. But when he came to the kevish of the mizbeach, it was a little different. The slant wasn't so high; it was a little lower, as you know, because the height of the mizbeach was up until where the maracha was, it was a little less than 10 amas, a little less than 9 amas. It was 8 amas and 5 tefachim, and so that was the side of the height of the kevish, because the kevish reached that level, and the length is 32 amas, or even if you say 30 amas, it's a little longer than that. So that the Gemara says, and Rashi explains what's the reason. The reason is because when the Kohanim would bring the korbanos up, it was heavier, it was heavy, it was not easy to walk. So for the kevish of the mizbeach, they made sure that it wasn't so slanted, the walking up. So I took some time and I measured 3 ways to build the kevish of the Beis Hamikdash. The first way, that according to the Pasha the Gipshat, we were saying that the 2 amas include the Yisrael and the Sevev. Then you have 32 amas. Actually, it's 30 amas and 10 tefachim. You have to be precise because it's 5 amas and Yisrael, 5 amas. So you have 190 tefachim. We're going to go by tefachim, and then the height of the kevish is 53 tefachim, because you have 8 amas is 48 plus 5 amas is 53. So then you calculate according to trigonometry. You can see that the angle according to the Pasha was 15.58 degrees. When it comes to the Rambam Mefirish Mishnayos, that he says the hypotenuse, the ramp itself, the surface was 32 amas. That comes up to 192 tefachim. So you also do the cheshbon, it comes up to a little more. It's 16.02 degrees. That's how much it was the kevish. And according to the way Dov Levanoni was built in his model, was much. He went a little even more, because he calculated it was 30 amas the ramp. That's 180 tefachim. By a height of 53, it comes up to 17.12 degrees. Now, there's an interesting in engineering. They always speak about what's the recommended when you have a structure. When you want to come from point A to point B, what should you put in there? Should you just make the floor a little higher? Should you make a ramp? Should you make stairs? Or should you put a ladder? So, in general, they say that from 0 to 18 degrees, that's recommended when they say to put a ramp. More than 18 degrees, they say that you should already start building a staircase. So here you see that all the measurements are below 18 degrees, so it goes according to lehavdil to the ways that the people measure today. The kavanah is that Mitzvah Shem we should be zeicha to not only when Moshiach comes, there are a lot of questions we're going to ask Eliyahu, but when it comes to these things, you don't have to ask, you just have to walk into the Beis Hamikdash and see ourselves what the Metzius is, and we're not going to have any shakers.
Sheikh Avi.